Welcome to another edition of Living with Purpose. Today I have Chris Browne, who is the former executive at Ted Baker that ran all of their retail programs. He's an expert in the retail space. He's had some phenomenal experiences working around the globe, literally in 500 different locations. And I'm really delighted that he's agreed to be on the podcast. So with that, let me welcome Chris Browne.
Thank you very much, Akhtar. Great to see you again, and I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Yes, and so let's just start off with your childhood and growing up, your parents, your family, and what were some seminal moments that you remember of your time with your family?
I always praise my mother, which is a bit unfair to my father, you could say, but I didn't have the best of fathers. They're both no longer with us, and so I don't want to say bad things about my father. But my mother was the star of the family. My mother had a quiet wisdom that sticks and stays with me, and my children tell me they can hear it coming through. Simple things, Akhtar. So she used to say to me, "If you don't ask, you don't get." So I'd ask, she'd say no, and I would say, "Well, that didn't work," and she said, "No, but you may have got, you just didn't on this occasion." And that silly little bit of homespun wisdom just stuck with me. So I've had a lifetime of always asking, always pushing, always asking. If you don't ask, you don't get. And that one stuck with me. But no, so my childhood was, I was always the lively one of four, a little bit of a character, very loud, very full of myself. And I think my mother's gentle, just, I can see you're handling the crazy life you're living, Chris, but don't, my brothers were called the boys. Don't involve the boys. Don't involve the boys in what you're doing. You can handle it. They can't handle it. Again, that stuck with me. My life's not for everyone. The way I approach life's not for everyone. Tiny bits of wisdom, but I've got catalogues of them from my mother. I always think of the film Being There with Peter Sellers, the gardener that became advisor to the president, just by homilies and simple wisdom about gardening that they mistook for great wisdom. My mother did that in her own way. I don't think she realised it was great wisdom at the time, just her gentle way. So that's how I started.
There's such an important lesson for our listeners, right? If you don't ask, the answer is already no.
Yeah, we will
But if
never
you
find
ask,
out.
it's a 50-50 chance, and somewhere a door might crack open.
Yeah, exactly.
So get into the habit of asking.
Put yourself in the position. That's my absolute mantra. I try. I'll put myself out there. I'll ask the question. I did it very successfully for the company. I was a skilled negotiator because I was relentless. I'd come back,
Yeah.
come
So,
back.
so, so, so let's talk about, so you grew up, you got this wisdom for your mother. She was your guiding light. And then how did that progress? Your schooling, your higher education, why retail? So give our listeners a little bit of that sense.
I would say I was intending to be a high achiever throughout my childhood. I was a bright kid. I did well at school. I competed to try and get the most, top grades in the class, and several times I succeeded. And I was set for a successful and hopefully, a great academic career. But my parents divorced when I was about 14, and I took it incredibly hard. And there's a great English word, which I won't use, slightly rude, but I basically didn't make any effort at all in my exams at 15, 16, which is an important end of school period in the UK. I failed most of them, having sat 12, of the qualifications. I failed most of them. I only really got the two, which were the wisdom was in my head. Anything that required me to revise and learn, I didn't bother. So I screwed up very badly. I didn't go to college. I didn't go to university, and I had to get out and work. I've missed a piece out here. I started working at the age of 12, Akhtar, so I'm 63 now. I tell people I've been in retail now for 51 years. And they always blink and think, how can he have been? But I worked in a newspaper shop at the age of 12. Again, always had the mindset to do more than was required. So we used to deliver the papers, being a paper boy. And I very quickly decided it was too cold, wet and miserable cycling around delivering papers. So I volunteered to mark up the papers for all the other boys, which the store owner said I couldn't do. Proved him wrong on the first day that I tried it. And for the next 2 years, I marked up the papers, sat in the warm, drank a cup of coffee, a cup of tea, had a chocolate bar, and handed out the papers to the other boys that went out into the wet and the cold. And then I continued that. I worked in a pet shop for 4 years. I loved working in the pet store. My brothers would still be asleep when I left for work, and they sometimes wouldn't have got up by the time I got home. So I always had a hard-working mindset. And the failure at academia ended up being a benefit because I had to succeed in some other way. So I started working in a bank. I had 3 years in a bank. Decided that the people and the lifestyle weren't for me. It's a bit of a dry environment compared to a sort of lively character like myself. I left the bank, did 6 months of pretty much nothing, just doing odd jobs for friends and working about. And I got a job in a shop, as so many people believe they can do, because I thought, how hard can it be? And I'd been doing it. I've been doing it since I was 12. So I was a natural serving customers. I was a natural keeping the displays tidy. Basic retailing, knowledge had seeped into me as a young teenager. And so that was the beginning. And once I decided to do it, my mindset was I'm going to be the best retailer in the history of the world. Whether I achieve that or not, we can discuss, but that was the plan.
So this is very interesting, right? So many of my guests on the podcast, if you've listened to their journey, have done just this one additional thing to get them to the next level, right? Here you are, nothing wrong with delivering papers, but there you just added another layer of effectiveness by saying that if I could actually do this, not only would my life become better, actually the whole process of delivering papers would become better.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And that to me is what I want our listeners to kind of understand, is to that one additional step that you take can make all the difference. So this is just a fantastic story, Chris, that you shared with us. So you've got into retail. So how did you move from there to running one of the biggest brands in the world?
So I like that point, which I hadn't really thought of before. But the fact that you've picked out that I changed what I was asked to do and I did something else. I did the same thing in my next role. I was told to go on a tea break, but I'd had quite a lot of tea. We was on the shop floor in those days. The owner of the store, the pet store, would give you a cup of tea regularly. His wife was making tea all the time. So when he said, go and have a tea break in the afternoon, excuse me, I thought I don't need a tea break. So I went and started breaking up the boxes and the packaging and all the stuff that we had to throw away at the end of the night, which was my end of day job. And he came out and he shouted at me. I was only about 15. He screamed and shouted at me. I sent you on a break. And I said, I'm working on my break. And he said, what? Nobody works on their break. And I thought, that's interesting. He's angry with me for working on my break. Anyway, cut a long story short, at the end of that day, he gave me additional pay. He said, I've never had a kid like you. I've never had a kid who does more than he's asked to do. So I then developed a bit of an obsession, probably, and it's stayed with me to this day, of doing more than I was asked to do. I've never had a boss or a manager or a regional manager when I was coming up through the ranks in retail able to tell me to work harder, because I always did more than I was required to do. I'd be in early. I'd do more than they were expecting, and I carried that on through. So I moved up to London, actually, and I worked on the King's Road in London. And just for a bit of excitement for your viewers, I served every celebrity you can possibly name in the 80s. Princess Diana was a regular. I mean, once a week she'd pop into my shop because it was next door to where she delivered William and Harry, the future King of England, and Harry, who's now over not far from you, down in California. But I would serve her on a weekly basis. She'd walk into the store and say, hey, Chris, what have you got for me? And I'd show her some new shoes, or I'd have a nice chat with her. But I'd serve Jack Nicholson when he was in town. He'd come to King's Road was the place in London to come and shop and find the latest fashions. Jean-Paul Gaultier, famous designer, Madonna in the early part of her career. I sold Boris Becker his first shoes to dance in at the Wimbledon Ball. And that gave me a real appetite for I wouldn't say the high life, but high fashion. I was so excited. I was a boy from the provinces of the UK working on the main shopping street of London. And I bumped into the guy who was effectively the founder of Ted Baker. I bumped into him one night working very, very late, preparing the store. And he said, look, I've got this idea for a business, but I need a retailer. I mean, it's crazy, Akhtar. I was 25, but I looked about 12. I look young for my age. I looked 10 years younger than I was. And I look back at the photos and I think, wow, he took a chance on me, 25-year-old kid working in a store. But we started off and we had 6 years of pain. Nobody would continue what Ted Baker did. We had 6 years of failing, refinancing, reorganizing who owned the company. I think it happened 4 times in the first 6 years. And most people would give up. But I believed in it and he believed in it. And over time, we developed a business that became worth about 1.7 billion at its height, 500 actual stores that we ran in locations, concessions, but something like 35,000 doors, as we call it in retail, 35,000 stores, department stores, opticians, suit stores, you name it, that sold the brand. So it became a huge business. And I think those guiding principles of doing more than required, I led the team in that manner too and trained people to think that way.
So just for our listeners who may not know what Ted Baker, the store, and what you were doing, if you can just give a quick highlight of that.
Absolutely. So Ted Baker started out as a niche retailer, which means you're serving and selling one category particularly well. So we chose men's shirts and we sold beautiful men's shirts across a range of uses, from very high fashion to business shirts to casual wear, but just shirts, and then a few accessories accessories that went with shirts, like ties. And then we gradually broadened out in the early 90s to do women's wear and the full range of men's lifestyle and women's wear lifestyle clothing. And we were very, very successful in the US when we had a store down the road from you in Bellevue. We had stores all over the US. We were considered one of the very few UK businesses to have become a major success in the USA and North America. And then we took that global. I mean, we focused on the US for about 15 years, I would say. Really hardcore work. You know, I've been to every city and every smaller city in the US to look at locations, to work with independent retailers, to sell the brand. We became one of the biggest brands in Nordstrom, huge business with Nordstrom. I think we were in every store with Nordstrom, across a range of everything that we did, from accessories to luggage to loungewear to you name it. We also launched children's wear, which became a huge part of the brand. And I actually believed, Akhtar, we were going to become, you know, the British answer to a Ralph Lauren or a Tommy Hilfiger, or really become one of the biggest global brands. And sadly, whether we want to discuss this or not, but I left the brand back in 2017, and soon after it really started to go wrong. Very badly wrong, and it still exists, but it's a much diminished brand today. So its height actually turned out to be the year that I left, or the year after, perhaps.
And so, just out of curiosity, why did you choose to leave when it was doing so well?
That would be a lovely choice of words if I did choose to leave. I had a huge row with the founder, and we just didn't see eye to eye anymore, and effectively agreed that I should leave the company. I mean, I felt that I was the canary in the gold mine, starting to signify that we were having issues, and unfortunately, he didn't agree with me, and it felt like some of my colleagues did agree with me, but perhaps wouldn't speak up loudly. And I was right. Unfortunately, the brand. Sometimes brands don't evolve. The point, they need to keep reinventing and evolving, or evolving is a better word than reinventing. You don't always have to completely reinvent. And we were failing to evolve. Is really what happened. And I could see that. And I was out in the stores. I was out in Japan and Australia and all over Europe and the US and Canada and Mexico, and I could just feel it in different degrees in the cities we were trading in. And the world was changing. You know, 2017 now seems quite pivotal. I mean, the UK, we'd come out of Europe, although it took a couple of years to unravel. We'd come out of Europe, which is still affecting us today. COVID was just around the corner. So a lot of things changed over the years that followed immediately after I departed. I like in my more big-headed moments to think it was all because I left, but it was much deeper than that.
Yeah.
You know, there were deep issues with the brand.
So one of the things, I mean, you just talked about evolving. And it is actually very interesting, because not do just organizations and companies need to evolve continuously. It's people need to evolve, right?
Yeah.
We as individuals just cannot say, this is exactly who we are and this is exactly how we will be for the next 50 years. It just doesn't happen, right? I mean, physically it doesn't happen. So mentally it should not happen.
Absolutely.
And how you show up should not happen. So this notion of how do we change, and the level at which we change and the speed at which we change, is very important to understand. And I think your example of Ted Baker and its ability to grow and become so successful, and then and this is happening with so many brands we see, right? Target being one example right now,
Yeah.
which is actually struggling as a brand to evolve.
Yeah.
Whereas Walmart has done a terrific job.
I was a big fan of. I did a thing called the Amazon Sellers Cruise out in the Caribbean, and one time we had a sort of, I wouldn't say an interloper, but we had a Walmart executive join the cruise and was talking about Walmart Marketplace and how Walmart had missed this initially, but had started to realize that actually they could add value and take some share from Amazon on things that you would expect to be able to buy along with your groceries. Because we all do it. We think of something we need and we just add it to our Amazon quickly. You text and say, oh, quickly, I need that, pair of shoelaces, whatever it might be. And Walmart realized that actually these are the sort of things we should be supplying. And so they've really and that was 3 or 4 years ago I had that conversation, I had that experience meeting the Walmart person. But I think a fascinating factor for me, Akhtar, which is I think why sometimes brands and people hit a ceiling, they hit a level they can't go beyond. We don't necessarily continue training and developing the leaders. They don't get training. I did personally. I would do self-improvement. I'd go on training events and courses myself. I'd attend the events that I set up for my teams. And I used to be evangelical about it to my fellow directors, most of whom weren't doing anything to continue learning from where they were. They were learning by experience, by doing the job. And I'm not damning them all for this, but they weren't actively saying, I've got some skill gaps, or some areas that I could do even better in if I spent more time on it. And I think that's a global problem. I mean, I was at a dinner on Tuesday, a retail dinner, with a group, very, very elite group of British retailers. And I expounded a similar point to them. And I got some disagreement. Oh, no, I think I do. I was like, well, what do you specifically do? Nobody could name anything they specifically did.
Yeah.
And it can be mindfulness, it can be taking time out, it can be physical improvement to yourself, whatever it can, it can be a range of things. But I think that's lacking. I really think that's lacking. And I think an arrogance towards it, or a feeling of like, well, I don't need any. I'm here. I've arrived. I'm the boss. But the boss should keep learning and keep improving and keep developing themselves. Otherwise, you get stuck. You definitely get stuck.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with you, right? I mean, I just feel that evolution and changing and learning and my journey, right? I mean, I'm an architect by training,
Well, I didn't know that actually.
right? I spent first decade of my life practicing and teaching architecture.
Right.
And then for the next 10 years, I went into the nonprofit sector. And then I ran Microsoft's philanthropy for 10 years. And now I'm doing what I'm doing, a whole
Right.
range of things. So, but it's the same education with a PhD in architecture, which has nothing to do with what I'm doing now.
No, funnily enough, one of my son-in-laws out in Australia is a trained architect, and what he's discovered from 10 years, he's about 10 years now into a career of being an architect, is he prefers the marketing and the business development side of an architect's practice, and that's what he does. He doesn't do any actual architecture anymore, any design. He's just completely stopped, and they're considering making him a partner in the business because he's brought so much business and different thinking to an architect's practice that were a bit siloed. They were a bit narrow-minded in their approach. We do this type of architecture. We don't do this. And he said, well, we could do that, and we could do that, and we could do that, and we could build it out here. So he's become so valuable with a completely different mindset to the one he started. And that's my point, is that you have to evolve. I became less of an out-and-out retailer and more of a strategist for the business for Ted Baker. And I think that's kind of where it went wrong for me in terms of leaving the company, because I didn't want to leave. I had strategy, thoughts and ideas for the business that nobody else at the time agreed with. And yet I think if we could go back in time, a lot of them would say, oh, I so wish we'd listened to what he had to say. Because I'm a deep thinker about that stuff. How is the world evolving? Where do we need to put the energy? How can we develop the business? I mean, the clothing itself, this is more of a fashion thing, but the clothing itself became stuck at a moment in time about 3 or 4 years earlier. And if you think that's now nearly 15 years ago, it didn't evolve from that point. And then actually when they tried to play catch up, they couldn't. And you see that happen with fashion and retail brands and people generally. I mean, Elon Musk is actually doing it as we speak. I think he made a comment the other day that the Chinese march on electric cars might mean that Tesla is not a car company for very much longer. Or words to that effect. Because he should, I personally don't think he should say that out loud, but internally that's absolutely what he's thinking, and he's right probably. We're seeing it in the UK. I see Chinese every other day. I see another Chinese electric vehicle, and they're very, very well made and very, very desirable. They will become a bigger force, and they can build the things cheaper than the American car makers or the European car makers can make them. So
yes, and that's the, and people don't understand, right, that how some people at the top of their game understand how the market is evolving and whether they decide to compete or to evolve.
absolutely. The phrase we use in England is, someone's had your lunch. Someone's seen what you're eating and quite fancies it, and they've come and taken it. And if you're not quick and you're not aware, you'll get swallowed up. I mean, I do think, it's fascinating. I actually helped to open the first Tommy Hilfiger store in London back in about 1983. And he was a fairly young man then himself. And I met him at a function in Dubai about 2 years ago. When I say met him, I forced myself into a crowd that he was being ushered through just to say, Tommy, I just want to say to you, do you remember the store on South Molton Street in London? And I helped to open that store, and I want to say hi. And he was amazed. And people around were like, wow, who is this crazy guy, meaning me? And I shook his hand, and he said, that's incredible. He said, oh, that store didn't work, but we learned so much. And I said, yeah, it didn't work. I actually said at the time, you're in the wrong street. You shouldn't be on this street. This is a women's wear street, and it was menswear only. But look what Tommy Hilfiger's done. Tommy Hilfiger's become a global phenomenon. He's stepped aside, really. I mean, he's the creative director still and the head of it, but he sold the bulk of the business to let a larger business drive it forward and drive it globally. And he takes a role, and sometimes that's the wisest move. You've done your bit, you've established a brand, but maybe it's not for you to continue driving it.
Let's pivot just a bit to talk about the importance of purpose and why, Chris, you believe in purpose and your why as the driving force.
So I've taken I was thinking a lot about this before I came to speak with you, and I know when you talk about it, it's the philanthropy and the doing good for the community and all of that, and that's very, very important.
Let me stop you here. I actually don't talk about purpose as philanthropy and doing good, right?
Oh,
I'm
okay.
very clear that purpose
Okay.
has got nothing to do with giving back.
Okay. Well, I
I
misunderstood.
want our listeners to be very clear on that, that
Right.
purpose is all about how you show up in anything you do.
Right. Well, then what I'm going to say does make sense completely. So I apologize for slight misunderstanding there. I created something about, I'd say, 15 years ago, maybe a bit longer, and I was having this thought that the business needed something else for people to really believe in. So we ended up calling it something fairly obvious, I think, but that was important too. That it was obvious. So we created what we called the vision, and the vision was broken down into the great vision for the company. And I've written it down just so I remember what I'm going to say to you. So that was the financials, product, the growth, and the overall markets that we were going to go into around the world. That was what was our vision for that. And then you could break the vision down into the actual individual places, and that place. So let's take the US, since you're in the US. The US team added elements to the vision themselves, which would be how is the vision going to work for us in this year and over the next 3 year cycle. So they'd have specific goals that were the US vision. And then if you come down to store level, the Seattle store would have a vision for its team, for the growth of its team, for the outreach, as in events, charities, things that it was doing that the team bought into and agreed goals. And then you'd have personal vision, which would be what's my personal ambition and how am I going to achieve the vision for me personally, whatever that might be, promotion to the next level. Even for those that wanted to leave the company, what were they going to be doing in the 2 years perhaps that we had them for, if they were at college or school or whatever. And then that became quite circular, that if we got the vision right all the way through all those steps, and the most important word that I used to use, and I think everyone enjoyed thinking it this way, everybody owned their piece of the vision. So
Yeah.
their piece and their efforts were down to them. And that fed into, before we came on air, I mentioned Excellence Day to you. Excellence Day was one of the engines of the whole thing. So what we did with Excellence Day was say, why is it okay to be just okay? Why is it okay just to be an average version of yourself? What would it be like if you could be excellent every day? Why don't we
Right.
have one day, just one day, where everyone goes to, I said to go to bed early, whatever time you go to bed 1 hour earlier than normal. So even if it's midnight, go to bed at 11. If it's 10 o'clock, go to bed at 9 o'clock. But get up 1 hour earlier the next day, come to work 1 hour early, and we'll be ready for you. And when you come to work, we'll give you, if you come in at the first thing, you'll get a breakfast. If you arrive at lunchtime, you'll get a brunch or a lunch. If you come for the evening shift, you'll get an evening tea, and we'll make it for you. So everywhere around the world, we had chefs come in, we had food available, we had takeout where we couldn't perhaps make our own food. We asked people to have their hair cut or their hair done. We asked them to wear their best uniform, their best outfit, ideally something new that they'd saved for the Excellence Day. They would make certain that all day long everyone was buddied up with a partner in the team, and they had to be excellent in everything, but nothing to do with selling and serving and being. We did that well as well. It wasn't intended to be that it lifted sales. It was just being excellent, excellent mood, excellent form, enjoying yourself and having fun. And then if you felt that energy slip, you were allowed to leave the shop floor, get out of the shop, go and get fresh air. You had to be excellent, excellent, excellent. Now, this is 3,500 people on a global scale, and in each area and in each store, they would do fun events, prizes, dress up competitions, best window display, a whole myriad of things that they chose to do themselves. And then I told you that I would call every single location, at least as many as I could. And this Excellence Day, nobody else in the company knew about. I didn't tell the head office teams. I didn't tell the founder. We just did this. And on that day, wasn't the intention, but on that day, we always achieved about a 35 to 40% lift on
Yeah.
sale in the previous
Yeah.
year. And the point of Excellence Day was really simple. Why is it okay to be excellent just once a year? Why can't you be excellent every day? And why don't you come up as an excellent version of yourself? And then we'd build the learnings from that and have all sorts of learnings come out of the day. But the most important thing to me was, Actos, the teams loved it. The teams absolutely loved it. They loved that idea and being
Yeah.
excellent. Oh, lots of people to do this.
Yeah, no, I mean, and to me, it's because you are now motivating them to show up as they want to show up. And
Absolutely.
that's really the point of purpose, is that it gives you the confidence to show up exactly the way that you want to show up every day. So as we come to the end of our time, give me your one golden nugget. You actually did start off with that. So maybe you want to kind of repeat that again as to the
Well,
one golden nugget that you want to share a piece of wisdom to our listeners.
my golden nugget, I mean, it fits with the words, a positive and a purposeful mindset, I suppose. But my personal golden nugget is choose happy. And I have this, I didn't even think, I'm calling it a golden nugget now for reasons you know well, but I didn't think of it as a golden nugget. It was just, why not? Why not? When the choice is happy or sad, choose happy. And the hard bit is choosing happy on the days when you really have got a good reason to be sad. You know, I always tell the story, and it's a sad story. I started with my mother and my mother's wisdom. The day my mother died, I was in the morgue with my brothers and sisters, and I turned to my sister when we were crying. We were standing there crying, and I said, "Don't be sad." And I hadn't finished speaking, but before I finished speaking, she punched me really hard in the arm, swore at me, told me not to be so stupid, so shut up. So I didn't finish the sentence. We then left the morgue and we went for coffee on the seafront, a place we used to go to with my mother, and we were all very, very sad, as you can imagine. And I said to my sister, what I was trying to say, if you'd let me finish, was don't be sad for the years we've lost. Be happy for the years we've had. And I wasn't meaning don't be sad now in this moment. I mean, my sister said to me years later, it was 30 years ago, my mother died. She said to me only recently, that thought you gave me has stuck with me ever since. Whereas I was feeling very, very, very sad. But then now I think, no, my mother died at 60 years of age. Be happy for the fact we had her for the years we had her. And I don't carry that burden of like, oh, wish she was still here, wish she'd lived till she was 84, 85, 90, whatever. As some of my friends' mothers and fathers have. I'm slightly jealous that they have their parents around. But that thought, so choose happy, and you choose happy when it's the toughest time to do it. And then you'll find a way through because of it. That's my absolute mantra for life.
It's so much easier to love than hate.
Yeah,
And that's the exact same thing, that if you focus on joy and being joyful, you will have moments of sadness, which is all lives go through that.
yeah.
But how do you discover that ability to be joyful? That to me is really what a purposeful life is. Chris, thank you so very much for being part of this podcast and being part of the journey with us. Again, to our listeners, purpose is that renewable source of energy that continues to drive humanity forward. Make sure that you articulate your purpose, show up with excellence, do that one little extra thing, at least if not every day, once a week, you will see the change that happens to you. Chris, thank you very much for being part of it.
Thank you very much, Akhtar. I enjoyed that.
Thank you.